evening to another Coffee with Pastors.
Good evening.
The co-host Colin Murray with a hat on. The easy came Colin. He's got wonderful tips. I think you are too high, Colin. It's squealing again.
I'm too high.
Yes, you're too high.
I'm too high. Well, I'm down to 75, John.
Okay.
I'm 71 now.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, give up.
That little touch. Technology, isn't it wonderful? Anyway, welcome to Coffee with Pastors with Colin, myself, and our guest is Richard Lucas, who is the leader, I believe, is that the right title? Leader of the Scottish Family Party.
Right, good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. Looking forward to a chat.
Good to have you on. Wonderful. And so, Colin, would you like to do the introduction?
Yes, I'll do my best, John. Richard Lucas is a man I've never met, never seen in the flesh, but he's a guy that I've come to greatly admire. He's the standard bearer. He's the political voice for Christianity in Scotland. He's bold enough and brave enough to say the things that we all want to say and believe, but don't have the guts to say. And this is what Richard says. Do the political parties say what you think? The Holyrood parties, from the Greens to the Conservatives, argue about independence, but they unite to endorse the dramatic cultural changes that are damaging our society. I would say amen and hallelujah without trying to get too political. So we believe there's a lot more to this man than just being a Christian political activist. He's a husband. I believe he's probably a father as well. And we look forward to finding out a lot more about Richard Lucas this evening. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks very much. I'm quite looking forward to being able to talk about some different things instead of the usual political things. Some things a bit more personal and wider ranging. So I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Well, we thought you might not want that political. But obviously, because you're the leader of a political party, then obviously that has a bearing on some of the questions. Well, let's just pray before we begin, as we always do. So, Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for Richard. We thank you, Lord, for his willingness to come on and be interrogated, as it were. But Father, we just hold this time up to you. Father, I pray, Lord, that for someone listening, and I believe there will be people listening, that would need to hear what Richard has to say. So, Father, we pray, Lord, that they would be able to hear that clearly. And, Father, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Colin, we is phone.
Sorry, I tried to share it, backfired. I apologise.
Okay, right. Well, let's begin. Oh, by the way, although Richard, we were talking about it before we went live, it's not all going to be political, by the way. It's going to be a question. Don't be put off by, if you're not into politics. Anyway, question one. Richard, where were you born and how was family life growing up, and were you raised in a Christian family?
Right, so we're going back 52 years there to where I was born. I was born in Stoke-on-Trent. That's halfway between Birmingham and Manchester. To a Christian family. I had that privilege. A Salvationist family. So I was brought up in the Salvation Army. I was a member of the Salvation Army until, what would it be? So 10 years ago or so, 10 or 15 years ago. So that was my upbringing. Yeah. So a great family, the ideal start in everywhere. A lot of the things we talk about with the family party are to do with what you might call like two-parent privilege and trying to maximize the number of children who experience that benefit in their life. And that's very definitely what I had. I really appreciate that. So.
Very good. Yeah, it's good to get a good start. Not that I had one. My family weren't Christians at all, but I envy people that, we've interviewed a lot of people who were from a Christian home, and it makes a big difference listening to them and, comparing with my life.
Richard, why is Stoke called the Potteries?
Because in centuries past, its dominant industry was pottery, making crockery, Wedgwood, Dalton, etc. And that was like the completely dominant up until, I don't know, sort of 50 years ago or so. And it's still a very interesting place to visit. It's not the most picturesque spot on earth, but there's a lot of industrial heritage there, lots of interesting things to see. So, yeah, that's the Potteries.
There you go. Of course, now it's the Phil Taylor, that's the biggest export from Stoke, the darts player, if you're into darts.
I'm afraid I've never heard of him, but I've got a claim to fame here. Now, remember Eric Bristow?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, remember him.
His wife was a darts player called Maureen Flowers.
That's right.
And I went to school with Maureen Flowers' son.
Yeah, man.
There you go.
You're impressed.
There you go.
Well, interestingly, it was Eric Bristow that brought Phil Taylor on in the darts and made him biggest one.
He was a Stoke-on-Trent man, Eric Bristow. I don't know if he was born there, but certainly when he was playing darts, he was in the area. He had a pub club thing that he owned. Yeah.
Wow, there you go.
Wonderful.
Moving on to school life then. How was school life for you? Did you excel academically? And have you any memories of your school days?
School life. Well, I went to a sort of idyllic primary school in a village just down the road. It was really fantastic. He said about excelling academically. When I was about, how old would it be? Maybe about 10 or so. Then my teacher called my parents in for a meeting and said, basically, we think this boy needs to go to a special school for the sort of educationally subnormal, because he just can't do it. He can't cope. He's really off the scale. He's so hopeless, really. That's what he needs, this sort of special attention in a special school. And I think my parents, one way or other, sort of taught them out of it and persuaded them to sort of give me another try in mainstream education. I mean, looking back, the whole thing just seems bizarre. I don't know however they came to that conclusion. I was very slightly, well, maybe sort of moderately dyslexic. And maybe I'm very slightly now. My handwriting was pretty terrible, and it is now. But apart from that, I think I was, doing fine. Anyway, but that's the story. That's what happened. But primary school was great. In terms of a special memory from primary school, the best lessons we ever had was with a teacher called Mr. Bagnall. We had a sand pit at the school for long jump and high jump. And he used to get these barrels and ropes and like the football gold crossbars and all sorts of bits of equipment. And he'd line the whole class up on one side of the sand pit and say, right, using all this equipment, you've got to get the whole class to the other side of the sand pit without anyone touching the sand. So he'd have various balances and structures being built. I mean, he'd get arrested for health and safety violations if he did it these days. But I absolutely loved it. That was probably my highlight of primary school. Going on to secondary school, I went to a secondary school that was really, really rough. It had a terrible reputation, gang fights. And apparently at one point, there's nothing to do with me, it topped a European league table for teenage pregnancy, apparently. I mean, it really was, as schools go, it was pretty dire. I was in the top class for things, though, and I think there were so many really difficult pupils that when the teachers got the top class, it was such a relief for them that they were sort of moderately well behaved. The relationship with the teachers was great. It also meant that we could get away with murder. No one would ever think that it was us that had done it. Yeah, so that was high school. I enjoyed that. I did well in my exams. Always, there's some subjects I really liked, some I wasn't so good at. I mean, French was my sort of bête noire. So my O-level French, I took it 3 times before I passed. One of the times I thought, I've cracked it this time. I've done really well. I think especially that comprehension about the robbery at the shoe shop, I think I nailed it. So I went out of the exam. I said to my friends, I said, that comprehension about the robbery in the shoe shop, they did so well with that, I think. And they said, it was a jeweler's. that was one of the 2 times I failed my O-level French. So that was school. Then I went to a separate sixth form college, did my A-levels, did well there, and then off to university.
Well, what did you study at university?
I did electronic systems engineering.
Oh,
It was a 4-year course sponsored by British Telecom.
okay.
So British Telecom paid me, and I worked for them during the holidays and studied away. I really enjoyed it, but by the time I got to the end of the course, I knew I didn't want to work for a company like British Telecom. And I also, having done the work experience, I wasn't at all sure I wanted to work in the engineering sector. They sort of put me off it a little bit. So I thought, right, what am I going to do next? So I looked at various things, various career options, and eventually landed on teaching. So I went to do the teaching course just to try it out. I thought, I'll see how it goes. And then, if I'm not much for it, I can look at something else. But I did the teaching course, really enjoyed it. Got a first job teaching down on the Isle of Wight in a boarding school. And that was my career until 3 years ago.
Wow, very good. Quite varied. A quite tortuous route.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good. Well, you've actually answered the next question about leaving school. Where did your career path take you? So, what sort of things did you teach?
Well, when I went to Isle of Wight, I taught maths, physics, electronics, computing. There's maybe another one I'm forgetting as well. So I was on the Isle of Wight for 3 years. I lived in a boarding house. It was a boarding school by the sea, by the beach. It was fantastic. Fantastic opportunities for Christian ministry as well. Could run a Christian union group, could organize a mission at the school. Amazing opportunities and a lot of fruit from that as well. It was really good. Then I came to Edinburgh to Merkston Castle School. Again, a boarding school, living on the campus, teaching maths mainly. I've taught a few other subjects a little bit, but teaching maths. Then I moved into the school. Well, I lived on the school in various capacities. But for 8 years, I was a housemaster. So I was responsible for the 12 and 13-year-old boys and their prefects living next door to the boarding house, being responsible for them 24/7, entertaining them, looking after them, keeping them in line, etc. And that was a great job. It's a really challenging but rewarding job, but it only comes in very large doses. You can't do it on 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I did a course once, and they said, keep a record, see how many hours you work during a week. So I just did it for the next week. It came out as 80 hours that I'd worked. So that was fairly typical. So it's very intense, but very rewarding. 8 years was enough, but I'm very glad to have done that. It was and again, lots of opportunities for Christian ministry within the school. Could run a Christian union group. So before bedtime, so the boys would run along to the day room and play some games, have a little Bible story, or pray or whatever, and then I'll go off to bed. It was great.
Now, this is a big question of the night. How and when did you meet your lovely wife, Mary?
Right, when did I meet Mary? Was it love at first sight? Now, I met Mary, I think it was 1999. It was through a mutual friend at church. And this friend at church had known Mary from earlier on. But then Mary at the time, she was working in the Transcendental Meditation movement. And she was working at a retreat center down in Suffolk. Now, obviously, Transcendental Meditation, the whole worldview and philosophy with it is hardly compatible with Christianity. They're pretty diametrically opposed in lots of ways. But I met Mary through this friend. But one of the first times I really noticed Mary, shall we say, was at the Millennium Party that I had at my flat. My flatmate and I had a big party for the Millennium, and Mary came along to that. I think it was just after then we started, we maybe went to see a film, etc., etc. But obviously we were coming from very different worldviews, shall we like. So we had hours and hours of philosophical discussion about these things. But then Mary became a Christian within a year of us meeting, I would say. Then we got married in 2001, and here we are today with 2 sons now, 2 teenage sons.
Great stuff.
Was it love at first sight?
Sorry, what was that again?
Was it love at first sight?
I was thinking about that earlier on, and I can't quite remember the exact order. But if it wasn't first sight, it was pretty quick.
Second sight.
Well,
Second sight. Okay. And I believe you work together as well.
Yes. So while I was working at the school, Mary worked at the school as well in various capacities. So it would mean when I was in the boarding house, she would help out with some things in the boarding house. But then more recently, she's had a job teaching the upper sixth form boys how to cook. So they go along, make their own lunch and eat their lunch. And each boy does that 6 times to try and give them some basic cooking skills so they don't go to university like I did, unable to make anything beyond angel delight. So, yeah. And Mary's still doing that job, yeah.
Great stuff. Right. When you left UKIP, and I think it was in 2016, you were quoted saying, "I want a right of centre, Eurosceptic, socially conservative party to succeed in Scotland, but I am not willing to sacrifice basic standards of decency and integrity to achieve it." Have you now found the party that ticks all these boxes and more?
You've certainly done your research, Colin. That quote, that's actually from a radio interview I did years ago, after I'd left UKIP. I mean, my political career, if you like, I was in the Conservatives at some point. I realized that with the number of things I was on record as saying, I was never going to get anywhere in the Conservatives. I tried UKIP and realized that there was the same problem there. Even though you might think, UKIP, surely they're not politically correct. But, I ran into the same sort of issues there. And one of the big things with UKIP, their policies I was fairly happy with in the main. But some of the people involved in it, particularly the leadership, I mean, they weren't the best characters, let's say. There was various goings on that were a bit disreputable, and they weren't really the right people to be leading a political party. So that's what I was talking about in that quotation. The fact that even though at the time, as a member of UKIP, I wanted it to do well, I wasn't prepared to support it while those people were at the top of it, because I think character and integrity is crucial in politics. But in terms of ticking those boxes, I would say, does the Scottish Family Party tick them? Eurosceptic? No, the Scottish Family Party is neutral on the European Union. Right of centre, the Scottish Family Party is basically neutral on economic issues. So we're not really on the traditional right-left spectrum. Socially conservative, very definitely.
Okay.
So what we're doing with the Scottish Family Party is we're not trying to get into every political discussion going. We're quite happy to sit out of the sort of things that there's already plenty of politicians talking about. We try and come in and say the things that no one else is saying.
Yeah.
Now, if we said, right, these are our socially conservative values, we're pro-marriage, we're pro-life, but we're also anti-EU, or we're pro-Scottish independence, then our potential support would just be sliced down the middle. And I think in the longer term, that would make it infeasible that we were going to reach the threshold to get people elected. So we try and stay neutral on as many things as possible and focus on our unique points.
Yeah, the big points, yeah.
Very good.
Very good.
Okay. Away from politics for a minute, I believe you were able to go to visit the Grand Prix Car Museum. Could you tell us where that is, and is the Grand Prix one of your passions?
Well, the Grand Prix Car Museum is a bit of a sad story, actually, because it's now closed. It was a Donington Park racetrack, and it closed about 3 years ago. I took my sons to it lots of times, and my youngest son then got really into motor racing, and we were so looking forward to going back again, and it closed. But yeah, motor racing's been a hobby of mine since I was probably about 16. I think I've been to see quite a few Grand Prix on and off, but my youngest son is now very keen on it. So actually, last weekend we were down watching some racing down in England. So yeah, that's quite a big hobby of mine. I think motorsport, obviously, if you've got the money, you can spend endless sums on it to compete. And I used to think, oh, that would be nice to have a try sometime. And still it would be. But I'm quite content with my low-budget spectator experience of it now. So, yeah, I do enjoy it a lot.
I mean, that Formula One spectator is not a cheap pastime anyway to go and watch Grand Prix. Formula One.
Yeah.
Quite expensive. But yeah.
I went with my son in 2019, and for two of us to camp in a field like a refugee camp, it was £400 to get in and to camp. So yeah, serious money.
Wow, that is serious.
The thing with Formula One these days, though, is it sounds rubbish. It used to be that you'd go to motor racing. Okay, you can watch it on TV, but what you don't get on TV is the noise. You don't get the ground shaking and the ear splitting noise. But that doesn't happen. You don't get that with Formula One in any case these days because the cars are quiet. So the pull of going to watch Formula One live isn't quite what it used to be. But there are lots of other sorts of racing I like going to watch. So.
Well, my father used to stay down in London, and when I went on holiday, he said to us, "Oh, I've got a treat for you tonight," because I was into motorbikes when I was younger. He says, "Oh, I've got a real treat for you tonight." I says, "What's that?" He says, "We're going to White Hart Lane." And I thought he meant to watch football. He said, no, it's the Speedway.
Oh, right, okay.
It's Speedway, because on the telly, it doesn't do it justice. They just go round it. But like you say, you're so close, you get covered in the muck. But the noise is unbelievable. And just the whole atmosphere. It was wonderful. It really was.
Yeah. I actually went to watch some Speedway. It's years ago now. We went to the Isle of Wight with some friends. And he decided it would be fun to go and watch Speedway because we didn't know anything about it. So long we went. It was so action-packed. The locals were saying they'd never seen so many crashes. And then the ambulance did more laps than the motorbikes. It was just people and motorbikes flying all over the place. It was quite memorable. I haven't been since.
Well, so having two sons, like you said, are there any hobbies, pastimes you're able to enjoy as a family away from the political stuff? Is there anything as a family, or is it?
Yeah, we're in the teenagery phase. I mean, when kids are younger, you can take them anywhere, can't you? And they'll enjoy it. So we're at the stage where finding common activities is a little bit more challenging. And my eldest son loves theme parks, so we'll all happily go to a theme park. I'm not happy going to like 4 in a week the way he would want to, but once in a while. And my youngest son likes the motor racing. That's great. We can go to a walk. We can manage that. We find going on holiday abroad is good because everything's interesting when you're in another country. Yeah. So we find that keeps everyone engaged. My eldest son's just started learning to drive. So that's a bit of a common activity now. I'll teach him to drive as well as I can. But the key thing in all that, I would say, is the activity that they never lose interest in is eating. So it's the meal table when you have the real conversation. You really maintain and build relationships. So yeah, the family meal table is the solid foundation, I think, and the others are the icing on the cake.
Yeah, very good. Right, what is your personal and corporate vision for the Scottish Family Party going forward? Would you be happy, do you think, just being a thorn in the flesh of the main parties, or do you aspire to be a major force in Scottish politics? What's your view on me moving forward?
All right, where would I start? I would say in a democracy, you can't become the government until the majority of people agree with what you're saying. So at the moment, the majority of people don't agree with what the Scottish Family Party says because they've never heard it. It's never been presented to them. They've just heard a deluge of opposing views to it. So it's a minority of people that agree with us. So what we've ultimately got to do is to persuade more people of the truth of what we're saying. And in other words, basically God's wisdom, if you like, a lot of it is, I would describe it. So you've got to persuade more people. So what's the best way to persuade more people of the wisdom or the truth of these political policies? Well, part of the process of persuading people, as we see it, is to get people elected. It's first of all to function as a party, and therefore we're presenting our arguments to more and more people. But then the point where we get people elected into the Scottish Parliament, suddenly you have far more attention on you, and far more people are going to hear the sort of things we're saying. So at that point, you would hope a lot more people would think, oh, you know, that makes sense to me. I think there's something in that. Yeah, I'm going to go along with that. And then you're starting to shift public opinion. And then in the longer term, who knows what direction that would head in. Maybe if public opinion did really shift on these issues, then the other parties would start shifting as well. They would move to cover the mainstream of public opinion. But in the shorter term, it's about persuading people through using the political system to be a voice, to put forward the case so that people are won over to it.
Very good. Very good. So we're not going to look for you to be First Minister the next time round.
No. I mean, if I'm First Minister, I would probably be an electoral fraud, I'd suggest. I demand a recount.
Very good. Go on.
Quite a respectable 17,000 people voted for the Family Party at recent elections. You guys were 8th placed out of about 20 parties. Were you happy with that showing, or were there one or two maybe smaller parties that you would have looked to overtake?
I would say our result was about on expectation. I would say if it had been much below that, we'd have been very disappointed. If it would have been much above it, I would have been very pleased. So it was about on expectation. Okay. Compared to the other parties, though, all the parties below us are like miles and miles behind. Parties with much bigger names like UKIP, Reform, which used to be the Brexit Party. Yeah. UKIP's got a much bigger name. Reform is also much better known. They had more media exposure. They seem to have a lot more money to spend. Okay. And yet they got less than a third of the votes that we got. So I think all the parties behind us, we've really left them behind by a very substantial margin, which I think is good. So I think that will help us to build for the future. The parties in front of us, I mean, George Galloway's Alliance for Unity, the publicity that party had was in a totally different league than what the Family Party had. And yet they ended up on 25,000. So not that far ahead. Yeah. Similarly with Alba as well, publicity in a totally different league to us. So I think it's a really solid foundation. We'll have candidates in the council elections next year. At the next general election, I hope, which is 4 years' time, I'm hoping the ambition is to have a candidate in every constituency. And if we do that, that will really mark us out as being a big step ahead of all the other smaller parties. Yeah. And I think we will then be seen as there's the parties in the Parliament, then there's the Scottish Family Party. But I think awareness of the party went up a lot. You'll hear commentators now quite often say when there's the parties in the Parliament, then there's Alba, All for Unity, and the Scottish Family Party. You quite hear, it's grouped together like that. I mean, Alex Salmond obviously is a massive figure. George Galloway as well is a very well-known public figure. Yeah. That makes a lot of difference. So I think to have got into their league was pretty good.
Yeah, good stuff. Great stuff. If a follower of Jesus had to choose between the Scottish Christian Party and the Scottish Family Party in terms of voting, why should they choose the Scottish Family Party ahead of the Scottish Christian Party?
First thing I'll say for this, I've actually voted for the Scottish Christian Party in the past. I'd never even heard of them when I walked into the polling booth. I was ready to vote for another party thinking, best of a bad lot, maybe. But then I saw on their Scottish Christian Party, I thought, I don't know anything about them, but they're probably going to be better for the ones I was going to vote for. And I voted for them. So a lot of the policies of the Scottish Christian Party would be similar to the ones of the Scottish Family Party, but they don't stay neutral on the issues that we stay neutral on. So the Scottish Christian Party is a right-wing unionist, Eurosceptic party. So it gets into every debate going. And the reason we're not a Christian party, well, there's several reasons. There's quite a lot. But one of them is we need to reach out beyond just Christians. There are plenty of Muslims who support us because they see our values, line up with their values, they want to get behind us. There's plenty of atheists that support us. So I think if we just focused on Christians, the advantage of that is Christians who just think, oh yeah, Christian party, they must be on my wavelength. But if you call yourself family party, you're relying on Christians thinking, right, what do they stand for? Oh yeah, that matches up with what I believe. So you've got to have faith in people making that connection themselves. But let's say in order to be able to reach more broadly, then we thought the family party name was better. The other problem with being a Christian party is people are going to look at every policy you have and assume that you're saying that's the Christian view. So when the Scottish Christian Party, at one point, for example, had the policy of bringing back the death penalty. So people look at that and they'll assume that what they're saying is that the Christian view is to bring back the death penalty. So we don't want to be in the position where people are saying that that's not really a Christian policy. But the other thing is, what do we want politics to be like? Do we want the Christian party versus the Muslim party versus the atheist party? And if you look at countries that get into that, it tends not to work out too well. You get a very divided society where the Muslims are thinking, we want a Muslim in charge. Christians, no, we want a Christian in charge. How do you begin to bridge that? You can't debate those things, because politics is about policies. So we put forward our policies. I'm a Christian. The policies are very much in line with traditional Christian values, but a much broader section of the public shares them because they've got a God-given conscience. So when people hear the truth, it resonates with them and it appeals to them.
Yeah, interesting. In 2014, I actually sat for the Christian Party in the local elections, and I just did it without actually scrutinizing things too much, but just to have like a Christian voice. I don't think I would do it again. I would be more behind the policies of the Scottish Family Party. The upfront policies that really matter. Anyway, Scotland has always been known as the land of the book, and you feel that over the years we've veered very much away from that. It's maybe quite an obvious question. Scotland is famous for being a land of the book.
That's long gone. That's decades, many decades since that appellation was justified. So I think the interesting question is now, it's not based on Christian principles. The question now is what's replaced it? What's come in instead? What is Scotland renowned for now? If you listen to Nicola Sturgeon, or basically if you listen to a lot of politicians, a lot of people in Scotland, they are trying to put forward an alternative foundation for the morality, for the vision of the nation. What's it come down to? It comes down to, I think, it's compassion, which is obviously a good thing, but it's not enough. If your response is just, we feel sorry for people, we empathize with people, so we'll let them do what they want to do, and that must be the best thing in every situation. Well, that's not the best thing. Sometimes just helping people to do whatever they like isn't the best way to produce a healthy society. So, for example, the structure of marriage creates a healthier society for everyone. Whereas if your value is just compassion, we just empathize with people, you're not going to come to the conclusion that marriage is a valuable social institution. So there's compassion, we say a good thing, but it's not enough. And the other thing is equality, sort of equality, fairness. And that's become such a core moral principle. I remember years ago, I did some research at the school I was in. It was about the boys' moral views. One of my questions, the starter question was, tell me the worst thing you can think of, the worst thing someone could do. And most of them would say, murder or torturing someone or something. One boy said, treating people unequally. I said, is that the best you can do? Is that the absolutely worst thing? He said, oh yeah, treating people unequally. That really is, the ultimate evil. And I think that they're trying to make equality again into this really broad moral foundation, but it's not. It's quite a narrow thing. So once they've said it's so important, is that they keep going to be finding new battles to fight on the equality front, even where there might not actually be a real problem. It's because there's this void. The void, what are our values? What can we come up with? And equality has been sucked into the void, and there's now got this huge overemphasis on it.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. John?
Now you're going to have to explain this question. You felt the brunt of this draconian cancel culture, and you are also aware of this prevailing woke ideology. That's the bit you're going to have to explain. How do you think we can combat this as Christians and true advocates of free speech?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, isn't it? I would say the way things are heading, give it 5 or 10 years' time, and the Scottish Family Party won't be able to function. I don't think. We won't be able to have a bank account. We won't be able to have social media accounts. We won't be able to register with the Electoral Commission. I mean, just to give you an insight into that, on the ballot paper for the last election, we wanted to put on pro-life in some of the regions as part of our party description. And the Electoral Commission, put it this way, they took a long time to decide that they would approve the term pro-life. So it really looked like they weren't sure if they were going to allow that or not. But just at the last minute, they decided they would. So how long is it going to be before they say, no, you can't? You can't even put pro-life on. That breaks equality legislation. So things are really headed in that direction very quickly. I mean, people might know about my case I had recently. I'm a registered teacher, and I made a video for the Family Party saying basically same-sex parenting isn't ideal because children need a mum and a dad. That's the ideal. So same-sex parenting falls short of that. So it's not the best for children. So basically, the General Teaching Council of Scotland did its best to get me struck off for that. I mean, by some divine intervention, when it came to the hearing, the sort of semi-independent panel threw the case out, which I was just completely shocked by. I had no reason for optimism at all. But they just threw the case out, and that was that. But still, I'd been through this process for 3 years. And that's the culture we're in. People really are afraid. With the Family Party, time and time again, I'll say to someone, you'd be a great candidate for the Family Party. And they'll say, I would love to do it, but I'm worried about my job. I'm a doctor. Mm-hmm. If I would do this, I might not be a doctor anymore. I'm a social worker. I'm a teacher. Or if it's young people, they say, oh, I want to apply to be a social worker. And if it's on the internet, I've been associated with the Scottish Family Party, that could be me done for. So I'm right behind you, but please don't put my name on. It's a really funny thing once. We're having a meeting in, where were we? Ayr, in a hotel. There's about 15 people there, around a big table. It was a great meeting. I said, let's just do a quick photograph. I'll just take a quick photograph. I said, if you don't want to be in the picture, just go off to the side. But it'd be great to have a picture. So I've got my camera ready. There are about 3 people left. Everyone else had gone. Because almost everyone in Scotland has got a reason to think you're potentially going to be making a sacrifice if you stand up for some of the values that we stand up for. So it's a very serious problem. So what's the answer to it? I think the answer to it is to speak out as much as possible. I tend to think if I say something, not like for teachers, for example, I've said that and I wasn't struck off. So other teachers might think, oh, maybe I could say half as much and that'd be pretty safe. The more people are saying things, the harder it is to persecute them, if you like. Yeah. And if we had a couple of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, then it really is all over for cancel culture, because people will be able to just say, look, I'm just saying the same as Richard Lucas said in the Parliament last week. Mm-hmm. You can't strike me off for saying the same as an MSP, can you? And it really is game over if you've got people in the parliament saying that. So I think speaking out, the more people speak out, the safety in numbers from that regard. For people who are not able to speak out for whatever reason, I think to really get behind the people who are is really powerful. I mean, ideally publicly, I find during my General Teaching Council for Scotland case, for every 20 people who are willing to say behind the scenes, we're right behind you, there might be one who would make some sort of public comment. In fact, that's probably not the ratio, probably 50 to 1, I would say. For every 50 people who would express support behind the scenes, maybe one would make some sort of public comment supportive of you. And I think when you're in that situation, public support is what you really crave, because they're trying to set up the narrative that you've just got completely wild, wacky, way off views and you're isolated. It's just what you think, but there's virtually no one who thinks that. So every person who stands up and says, "Yeah, that's what I think," that's really valuable when you're in that situation.
Yeah.
Well, back in the 60s, Martin Luther King, that's exactly what he was telling people was to come together and be a louder voice. And it took that lady on the bus. What was her name again?
Rosa Parks.
A spark that lit the fire. That people are reluctant to speak out because of this, they don't want to be targeted in any sort of way.
Yeah.
But there we go. Now you said this, and I quote: "Church should be an open, welcoming place where all people should be accepted, but we should share what God really wants for them. What if they feel welcomed and accepted, but don't see any need to change their lifestyle?" Quoting, "I'm okay, Jesus loves me anyway." What would be your stance on that? What would be your take on that?
That's a tricky question, isn't it? That quotation, I'm sure I would have said that. I can't remember when. That must have been quite a long time ago. But that is definitely something that I would have said. So someone coming to the church, the aspects of their lifestyle are not coming into line with Christian teaching. What should happen? Well, I think when someone becomes a Christian, it's a process, isn't it? I think I suppose the danger would be that we might focus on sort of externally obvious sins and expect people to sort those out instantaneously, whereas maybe equally serious but less obvious ones we're maybe a lot more tolerant of. So maybe we need to balance that up a little bit. I think the ideal in the church is when someone comes in, if it's to do with an aspect of sort of external morality, so the people can see the person's lifestyle. I think in that case, the ideal is that the people in the church know what the teaching of the church is, and the person who comes into the church realizes at an early stage what the teaching of the church is. And then within that context, God can do his work over a period of time and with pastoral support or whatever. I would feel with this, I'm not a pastor, so I feel I'm a bit unqualified to comment on that, but I think that could be a process going on. I think the danger is when you've got a church where the church membership, they're not quite clear what the official sort of line is. They're not quite sure what biblical teaching is. And the first time they have to face the issue is when you've got a person in the church who's challenging it from a personal point of view. And that's when you end up with problems, because people feel like a sympathy, they feel compassion for that person, and things can start to get a bit confused. So the ideal is when the teaching is clear, and then lead the person through that process with a pastoral hat on, which I don't possess.
It's called a minefield.
Yeah.
But when Irene and I became Christians, I was 29, Irene was a wee bit older. It's a long story, but we ended up living together, and we would have gone on in that position. We're quite happy living together. We didn't see the need. I didn't believe in God and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, when we became Christians, my dilemma was instantly. Now, I haven't had any teaching. I got saved the second time I went to church, so I didn't. I was not taught this. But on my way back to the house, my dilemma internally was, how am I going to tell Irene that we can't live together because we're Christian?
Mm-hmm.
She was sitting in the house waiting for me to come home, and her dilemma was, how am I going to tell him that we can't live together?
Mm-hmm.
So, the Holy Spirit, if the Holy Spirit's got room to move, we weren't taught that. But I mean, it wasn't long before we recognised that was what the biblical view was, that you needed to get married.
Yeah.
So we have to allow the Holy Spirit, but at the same time, I totally agree with what you say. We need to have definitive biblical principles that we cannot stray from. Yes, we accept people through the door with all sorts of things. Of course we do. But somebody once said Jesus loves them, but loves them too much to let them stay the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it for me. And I just think, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think, like you're saying about the political thing, how the family party is maybe going to be struggling in a few years to even exist. I think the church is going to have a problem in maybe not even years. If we don't stand up for what the Bible says, what we believe the Bible says.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I think the screw will be tightened in various ways, and I mean the government will always be too smart to have some sort of blanket measure against churches. It will just be the outliers that are picked off.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one story. I don't know if you're familiar with this story. There's a church, I think it's in Larbert, who basically applied for planning permission to build a new building, and some local people, I mean, basically LGBT activists, they were quite open. They said, right, this church is homophobic. We don't want them in our community, so we're going to object to the planning permission, and they did. But they didn't object on the grounds that they didn't like the teachings of the church. They came up with every other objection they could. It's car parking, it's traffic flow, it's the shadow, it's you name it. They came up with them, but they were absolutely open. That they said that their real reason was the beliefs, and they were successful. They got it blocked. I don't know how the stories turned out in the end, but I understand that they did get it blocked like that. So I think that's just a foretaste. I mean, the Franklin Graham being cancelled, Destiny Church's conference in Edinburgh being cancelled. So I think that's a sign of what's to come. I think what can happen with Christians is there can be a temptation for Christians to say, well, okay, that church or that Christian, they've got into hot water. But the reason is they're not quite as wise as me. If they'd just been a little bit wiser, the way I would have been, they wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have said it quite that way. They wouldn't have quite had that speaker invited. They wouldn't have put it on their website in quite that way. So they would have avoided the problem. So instead of getting right behind them and saying, there, but for the grace of God goes my church, they tend to think, well, we're just a bit wiser than them. So they've really got it coming because they really made a mistake with what they've done. I think that the church really needs to get out of that mindset. It's suicidal, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Colin, what about you?
Well, we'll throw in another couple of questions because we're doing okay for time. We believe you go to the Roman Catholic Church, is that correct? Or are you still in the Salvation Army?
Now, I saw these questions in advance and I thought, shall I correct that one? I thought, no, this is going to be interesting to talk about. No, I've never been a Catholic. I currently go to a New Frontiers church, charismatic evangelical church. The reason it's interesting is I can quite understand why you've come to that conclusion. It's because I do talk about, particularly during my General Teaching Council for Scotland case. I mean, when you're there standing before the authorities and they're saying, you're standing here charged with saying that children need a mum and a dad, ideally. Then what are you going to quote to back yourself up? Now, if I'd have said, look, one of the most popular bloggers in the New Frontiers movement agrees with me. I mean, what how much weight would that have carried? I mean, that would have been a waste of time, wouldn't it? But I said, you go to the Vatican website, look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and you'll see that what it says is exactly what I said. And I think that might have been a crucial factor of what got me off the hook, actually, because I just showed so clearly that what I was saying was exactly in line with Catholic teaching. So basically, when I want to pin down what sort of mainstream Christian teaching is on social moral issues, the best way to do that normally is to look at the teaching of the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. So I'm quite often referring to it, but I'm not actually a Catholic. There are lots of Catholics in the Scottish Family Party, though, a lot. And it's quite interesting. So a bit of a tangent here. It's quite interesting seeing the contrast between the Protestant Church and the Catholic Church during the election campaign. For example, the Catholic bishops in Scotland, they write a letter to every congregation to be read out in services so that every Catholic who goes to church will hear the bishop's letter. And the bishop's letter says, these are the key issues in this election campaign for a Catholic. Number one, sanctity of life. And it basically says this is an issue of such momentous gravity that it should be given primary importance in your decision making at this election. And it goes on to talk about, supporting family life, etc. I mean, really, I would say very clear, powerful guidance. Where I think that would be seen as overstepping the mark, probably in most Protestant churches. So it's been interesting for me seeing the contrast with that. So
yeah, that. What do you say about people who say about pro-life? What about the terminally ill people that are in a lot of agony? And what about the young lassie that's been raped and gets pregnant? Should she not be allowed to have an abortion? How would you respond to these sort of questions?
Right, well, we'll go for the second one first. With the abortion issue, the Scottish Family Party's policy is deliberately a bit vague. It says we want to basically end abortion as a means of contraception. So abortion wouldn't be allowed except in extreme circumstances. Right, what are the extreme circumstances? What we're meaning in the policy is we're not wanting to get into rape or mother's life in danger. Those issues. So we don't want to get into this, which is not to say we think they're not important. I mean, in my view, if the mother's life is in danger, then there can be a case for an abortion. In terms of a child of rape, then I think people who are conceived in rape are just as valuable as anybody else. Yeah. But from the family party's point of view, if I'm going to be interviewed by someone about our pro-life, I don't want to spend the whole interview arguing about people who've been raped. I want to put it on one side and say, let's worry about the 99.99%. Let's deal with that issue. When we've dealt with that one, we can maybe think about this tiny side issue. So it's a tactical move by the Scottish Family Party that we've deliberately sort of left that vague in our policies so we can focus on the big issue. Some people say we should be clearer about it, but we do think very definitely, there's a straightforward, simple issue of abortion on demand. Yeah, and that's the battle we're fighting at the moment. So we'll keep that straightforward. Now, on the other issue of assisted suicide, I think palliative care these days is excellent. I think offering people the option of suicide, euthanasia, I think it creates in people, in many cases, a feeling that it's their duty to take it up. There shouldn't be a burden on the family. There shouldn't be a burden on the state. And so people feel pressurized in that situation. And there's no way to avoid that. They talk about, we'd have safeguards to prevent that. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. If maybe you are being a burden on your family. And maybe your family is thinking, but that's absolutely fine. We're absolutely happy to care for you and to do whatever it takes. Still within that person's mind, they might be thinking, oh, should I really be putting them through this? Maybe I shouldn't. And you hear commentators in the media quite regularly, they'll talk about someone who's committed suicide as making the brave decision. So the inevitable corollary of that is that some people who choose to live, therefore, must be being cowardly. So if you allow that ethos into society, I think that's massively dangerous. I did a debate years ago with Patrick Harvey, leader of the Scottish Green Party, on this issue, because the Green Party are for assisted suicide. And I said to him, if you were talking to a group of teenagers and one of them put the hand up and said, Patrick, do you think committing suicide is ever the best option when you're facing challenges in life? I said, what would you say, Patrick? Surely your answer must be sometimes, or it depends. Whereas my answer would just be no, it's never the best option. And his answer was, well, he still hasn't answered. I think it was about 8 years ago I asked the question. I'm still waiting for an answer. It wasn't prepared to answer it. So it's there's a fundamental moral issue. I mean, my conscience just says no, it should not do that. Doctors or anyone else, they shouldn't help people commit suicide. People shouldn't commit suicide themselves either. It's not the right thing to do. But then there's the practical elements as well. In terms of the bereaved as well, to know that your loved one decided it wasn't worth carrying on. They weren't that bothered about staying with you and enjoying the remaining whatever period of company within the family. They decided that wasn't that important, that instead they wanted to end their life. I think that's hurtful as well to the bereaved. And I believe there's evidence showing that where someone does die by suicide, even or euthanasia by their own decision, then the grieving process is more difficult for loved ones. This is going to be a big issue in this parliament. It's going to come back. The Greens and the Lib Dems have got as their policy. The SNP indicated basically that they were going to look at it again. In other words, they're going to bring a bill forward, you'd assume. My guess would be that it's going to pass in this parliament as well, sadly. But we'll do all we can to prevent that.
Really tragic. Well, Richard, sadly, we're nearing the end. So we just come to the last question. If there's somebody watching on this evening or later on when they watch it and say, I like what this man says, it makes sense, I would love to be involved in some role with his party, how could they do that? How could they get involved?
Well, our website is the place to start. You can sign up for our newsletter or become a member. If you sign up for the newsletter, you'll find out about local events. We'll be having meetings, Peterhead, Aberdeen, around the place. As soon as we're allowed to, we'll be having local meetings, and we'd love to meet people. That's often the way people get involved with the family party. They come along and they meet people, and you make that personal contact, and we take things from there. Also, social media as well: Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube in particular. We put a lot of our content out on YouTube, so do give us a follow, or subscribe, or whatever. You'll be able to keep up with what we're doing. We're having a conference on the 13th of November. I think it's going to be down in, I think it's going to be Perth, actually. So watch this space, but that should be a really good day. Hopefully be an inspiring day. But yeah, please do keep in touch and do get involved. We'd love to meet you and appreciate your support.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. It's been a real blessing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been good. Excellent.
Been really fascinating and intriguing. Inspiring, it's been great.
I think it's one of the few times, not that I've spoken to many politicians, that we got some sense out of a politician. So that's so thank you for that.
Excellent.
And we always ask our guests who would honour us with praying for the folk that are listening in. So, Richard, would you do us that honour to pray for folk listening?
Yeah, certainly. That's right, Lord. I thank you for our hour together this evening, Lord. I thank you for the fellowship we've enjoyed, Lord. I thank you for your work in each of our lives, the way that you've led us along different paths, fulfilling different visions for you, Lord. And I pray you'll carry on that process for the three of us here and for everyone watching and listening as well, that you'll keep leading us in the direction that you've got for us, into the plans you've got for us. And Lord, I pray that you'll bless those, the things that we get involved in to serve you, Lord. I pray that your blessing will be upon them. And Lord, we pray for the nation. We talked about it being the land of the book, the people of the book in the past, Lord. I pray that there will be a restoration of your values in Scotland, Lord. I pray that as people appreciate their wisdom, appreciate your wisdom, that there will be a turning back to truth, and alongside that, a turning back to you as well. So thank you for all that you give to us, and thank you again for our time together tonight. Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you very much, Richard. That was great.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. I enjoyed that. It was a very relaxing Friday evening. I enjoyed that.
Well, it's been wonderful having Richard on tonight, but please log in next week. We've got Joanne McBain Joanne Bain, not McBain, Bain from Arford, Ricky's wife, but much more than Ricky's wife, a great woman of God herself. So we're looking forward to having Joanne on next Friday at 7 p.m. But we'll be really blessed tonight with Richard. Thanks, mate.
Right, thanks very much. Right.
We'll see you again. Thank you.
Guys.
Bye.